Hey y'all, it's Kelly Clarkson with Wayfair, where delivery and setup are as easy as a few taps on your phone. Picture this. You're relaxing in an old hammock, scrolling Wayfair's app when you spot it. A brand new patio set. Next thing you know, Wayfair delivers it right to your patio and sets it up. Oh, you need a new grill too? All right, Wayfair's got you covered. With Wayfair's room of choice delivery and fast expert setup on qualifying orders, life gets a little easier. Visit wayfair.com or the Wayfair app.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Andrew, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the show. You are a partner and the head of activation at 17 Sport, the world's purpose-first sports marketing agency. So can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. 17 Sport is we're a purpose-driven sports marketing and investment company. And kind of really what that means is that our core organizing principle is about bringing together business success and positive societal and environmental impact. So, in other words, it's about solving business problems while also contributing to making the world a better place for us all to live in. And it's sort of our core foundational block because we sort of fundamentally believe that purpose shouldn't be something that just lives in the CSR department or your brand's foundation, or rather something that needs to live throughout the organization and be a tool that's used both internally and externally while still having that impact. So that's sort of our core ethos. And then sort of within that, we operate a pretty traditional sports marketing company, covering everything from upfront sort of strategic thinking, sponsorship, activation, campaigns, and then through execution of those strategies. So thinking through, for example, working with the brand, who they might sponsor, what that sponsorship actually looks like, and then executing that strategy and actually bringing everything to life, whether that's in person, digital, video, etc. It's been great. And we've only actually been around for about 6 years, but we've been lucky to work with quite a few notable brands, if I do say so myself, but brands like Adidas, Nike, Deloitte, Allianz, UEFA, the IOC. So some big names in there, which we've been very fortunate to work with. We also do a bit of athlete representation as well. It's a pretty boutique representation business that we have. We really only work with select athletes that are very much mission aligned with us. So those who want to achieve greatness on the court or on the field, but who also, are committed to sort of a larger legacy. An example of someone that we sponsor or we represent is Ezra Freck. He's a US Paralympic track and field athlete. He won 2 golds in Paris, and he's also just an incredible advocate for disability sport. And then maybe just quickly on the investment side as well, it's actually a pretty new part of what we do, but something that we're very, very excited about and we've seen a lot of growth in. And obviously, as you've had guests on your podcast recently talking about investment in sport, it's just surging right now. There's an incredible amount of growth, and everything from clubs and teams being sold to individual teams within that. So a men and women's team being split and sold to different people, but also new organizations like Love Volleyball or Unrivaled. And really our goal there is to sort of bring our purpose expertise into that space and ensure that there's not just a financial return and that this financial investment is sound, but also that we're mission aligned. And I think really to make sure that we're integrating purpose into the DNA of those transactions and making sure that when we come out on the other side, what made that team or that league or that new property so beautiful and so authentic and real to the fans stays that way and is something that we don't lose that thread just because additional investment has come in.
Very interesting. Their purpose is, everyone is saying that for, as you said, and it lives maybe in the CSR departments. And nowadays, maybe the Gen Z specifically are very on board that it has to be purpose driven and they can spot if something is fake or not a while along from a distance.
Absolutely.
So how are you making sure that your clients know that your purpose is true and you're doing this and it's not just something that you say?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a couple of steps that we take before we even decide to work with somebody. The first is education, sort of helping them understand what we mean when we talk about purpose and when we talk about authenticity and impact and these words, what does that actually mean and what does that look like? And what must a brand or a league or a team be sort of required to put in and sort of to invest in, both in terms of financial investment, but also time and other resources. There's that piece. I think we're also pretty stringent on who we work with. We want to feel like the partners that we collaborate with are people that are very authentic with what they're doing. We don't want to greenwash or sportswash. We don't want to do anything like that. So it starts kind of upfront. And then I think it then develops further on into the actual design of what we're doing together. And I think just because we're designing, for example, a communications campaign or a sports sponsor or a sports activation strategy, it doesn't mean that purpose can't live throughout that and be something that exists outside of that. That's a enduring legacy to what that happens. It's really sort of that upfront education and then diving into the details of what does that actually look like when it's being built.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned also that you have some athletes representation and one athlete from Paralympics. And I read somewhere that the Paralympic sport is a $5 billion market that maybe some sponsors are sleeping on, but not you guys.
Not us. I'm definitely trying to convince more and more of our clients and partners of the same. And I think you're seeing that more and more. It is just such an untapped market, and both the athletes themselves. I mean, we work with quite a few partners. Allianz, for example, is one of them, who want just Paralympic athlete teams. They want those corporate teams and they want them to be just Paralympians. And it's largely because those Paralympians are so inspiring and so authentic and so real, the way that they show up, the way that they talk about their performances and also what they care about out of competition. We're seeing more and more of that for sure. One of our co-founders at 17 Sport, Fabien Paget, is made it one of his 2026 predictions that disability sport stops being sort of something that's pushed over to the side and something that is a lot more focused on. I think we saw a rise in that in 2012, London Olympics and the Paralympics, and hoping to see more of that as we head towards LA 28.
Yeah, Paralympians usually have very interesting stories and they have overcome so many diversities in their lives. So from a marketing perspective, you can build a good story around also and involve the purpose in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a way to do that with our partners or with anybody that tells a story that doesn't seem like we're talking about a charity situation, but rather talking about incredible athletic achievements. And they just happen to also to have a disability as well. And so there's a way to sort of weave that story and tell that story. Often the best mouthpieces are those athletes themselves, of course, but to do it in a way that's uplifting and inspiring and talks just as much about the athletic side of things as it does about any of the other issues, but still that they can be sort of a beacon of achievement for all people.
Yeah. And LA 28 in 2.5 years, something. Are you already planning some partnerships for that?
Yeah, we are. We're starting to see more and more of the brands start to get ready for that. I think a lot have sort of paused because the Winter Olympics start here in a couple of weeks. But for the most part, we were fortunate enough to have quite a bit of work that we did on Paris 24. And a lot of those partners are continuing over, obviously, as top partners and some of the other local ones that are joining up. And so we are starting to work with partners around framing what that looks like. I think legacy is going to be a big piece of the LA 28 Olympics. I think from a city perspective and really what the city of Los Angeles sort of pitched for with LA 28 was around leaving a lasting legacy for the city. I think the brands are very much aligned with that. I think it's going to be a massive spectacle. There's going to be a lot going on, but I'm hopeful that a lot of the brands are going to be working sort of before, during, and after on the sort of pieces that are maybe a little bit more under the radar or more focused on how we're helping the city, how we're helping grow sport and those types of topics.
Yeah. As we said, Milano Cortina is coming up here really, really soon. Have you been involved in any work regarding that?
A little bit here and there. It's not a ton of work for us at the moment. I think the Winter Olympics tend to be, other than the top partners, that tend to be obviously a different set of partners. The local partners are very different. Not so much, but I will certainly be watching as a fan.
Me too, for sure. If we're looking at sport on a larger scale, the World Economic Forum's Sport for People and Planet report came out here quite recently, and sport is a $2.3 trillion global economy. But we're seeing now with the younger generation, we have more physical inactivity, more screen time, issues with climate and so forth. What is your take on that, and how do you think that we can keep sports going since it's so important from many aspects?
It's a really interesting question and really timely that the report has come out recently to really help put some sort of updated numbers against this ecosystem, but also against the problems or the challenges that we're going to be facing as a sports industry. I think what's really interesting to me about that report was, as you mentioned, it's a $2.3 trillion industry, and I think it's projected to grow sort of another trillion or even more by 2030. But that also, these significant issues that if they aren't solved, if they aren't curbed, we're actually going to see a reduction in those earnings. And I think the really compelling takeaway for that, for me, when I talk to teams, federations, brands, it's not just the impact piece, whether that's the physical inactivity or access to sport, or whether it's the environmental challenges. It's now no longer just a nice to have, but it is really like a commercial risk. Your sponsorship dollars, they're going to be doing less work for you if we're having to cancel games, if we're having to move things, if young people don't want to play sport, if they can't access sport. So there is a real commercial. I mean, this report was so good at putting real numbers to what the risk is, I think that's going to be imperative. And at the risk of sounding a little bit cliche, sport really is one of the few remaining sort of like bastions of connectivity and community that we all have. I mean, the reality with the world right now is different shows. We watch different news. We listen to different podcasts, for example. There's not that sort of monoculture or that sort of the thing that we all watch, with the exception of sport. I mean, I think the Super Bowl last year was like 120 million people watched it. Millions and millions watched the Olympics in Paris in 24. We have this opportunity here with sports still being this thing that can bring everyone to a table and everyone crowded around a track or crowded around a pitch and even beyond, thinking about how that affects that. But to really then focus as a sports ecosystem on how we can make these improvements and kind of shore up the foundation of sport.
Yeah, I think that's very, very important. And also, if we're thinking about, except for the challenges that we already mentioned, you're having a shorter attention span nowadays with everything that has come with the screens. And how would you see that impacts marketing? I mean, like many of the young generation today, they don't watch a full game. They're watching highlights. So if you're putting, obviously you mentioned Super Bowl, you have the Super Bowl halftime show, that's maybe a different thing. But if you're having a game and you're throwing commercials in here and there, if people are not watching a full game anymore, how does that affect the sponsorships and the marketing aspect of it?
I think that basically throws the reach metrics a little bit through a loop. I think, a lot of sponsorship obviously has been based on, what is the reach? How many people are going to see our logo? How many people are we going to get eyeballs or how many eyeballs are going to be on our brand? And I think, as you said, when attention spans get shorter, where people don't watch the games, frankly, I think a lot of us tune out the background boards. For example, watching a football match, you don't really see the logos floating around the boards anymore. You miss so much of this. But I think it's really begging the question of what brands can do to stand out and can make an impression in a different way. Obviously, for us, that is really answered very well by taking a purpose-driven approach or a purpose-led approach, which is sort of focusing on how you can build a long-term relationship, build long-term loyalty and trust within fans and within the sort of broader consumer base, and doing that through purpose topics. And then, as I mentioned, you're also then building the resilience of sport, right? So it's like very real actions that you're taking and impact that you're going to have, while also then showcasing to these fans. You're reinforcing and you're building up the thing that they absolutely love, the thing that we all crowd around the screen or go in person to watch and to feel these moments. And then they'll know that your brand was the one that helped make this possible. And I think that that's to be the future. I think that it has to be the way we think about sponsorship and about marketing. I think, as you mentioned, there's a whole bunch of stats on Gen Z about seeing through non-authentic actions and that it's so easy for them to see it now. So yeah, I think that's the direction that we have to go.
I agree. I don't think it's only Gen Z, although they're probably better at it. But if you're seeing some influencer, for example, promote a brand, it's pretty clear if you see that that's actually a brand that this person is using or not, or if it is used for the cash. And that largely impacts your view on that brand as well, I would say.
100%. And actually, there's another report that came out just recently by Edelman, and it's sort of their trust. I think it's Edelman. Apologies if I'm getting it wrong, but it was this sort of trust barometer. And what do people trust in? Is it institutions? Is it governments? Is it nonprofits? Is it leaders? I think it was the top or near the top. The trust that people have in brands is pretty incredible. I think that might have more to do with the absence of trust in other institutions in our society at the moment, but it still is the fact that people are looking to brands and they trust these brands. And so how do you reward that trust? How do you reinforce that trust? And how do you build long-term loyalty? And the obvious example when anyone talks about purpose is someone like Patagonia, right? I mean, but I think Patagonia is still, even though it is the obvious choice and the cliche choice, it's such a good example of a brand that has a very clear mission. It articulates it very well, and it also acts on it very well. And I think when somebody goes in there to buy Patagonia, if they are able to, they look past the price and purchase it anyway, because it is a statement. It is about aligning yourself with a certain view of the world, but it's also about supporting the acts that they take. So can we sort of replicate that with other brands? And I think there's a lot of brands that are doing good work outside of that. I would like to see more consistency in it for sure, continuing to do it and not sort of giving up just because a tournament is done, but we're getting there for sure.
Yeah. Was Patagonia the brand that they did not participate in Black Friday and all of that, or?
Exactly. And the way that they've set their brand up, and there's a whole bunch of initiatives and all kind of, I'm sure I'll miss some of the key ones, but they do a lot of sort of repairing the gear and talking about sustainability. They do a lot of advocacy work for saving different sort of environmental ecosystems and things like that. So they're very sort of out there and present when it comes to that message.
Interesting. So in your role as activating, how do you balance commercial objectives with the genuine social impact when you're designing these activations for clients?
It's a good question. And I think every example is a little bit different and every project is a little bit different. I think in principle, one of our core things, there's the obvious stuff, right? Like making sure that we're using suppliers that have environmentally sustainable supply chains and things like this, of course. But beyond that, it's about making sure there's an authentic attempt to change something or to provide solutions. And really where that starts for us is thinking of it as a systemic solution, right? So inevitably, projects will end, brand funding will shift focus. And we want to make sure that anything that we do, that we're leaving sort of a lasting systemic change within the communities that we work so that the work can continue in some shape or form. It might not be at the same level that it was with a brand sponsoring it, for example, but that isn't just immediately going to revert back to whatever it was. I mean, a good example of this was a project that we've worked on for the past 6 years, which was the Adidas Breaking Barriers project. And it's a pretty robust project, but sort of at its sort of core fundamentals was about creating systemic change within grassroots sports, within local organizations across Europe as a way to sort of help them better recruit and retain girls. In this case, it was focused on getting more girls into sport and keeping them there. And it was really about working with those organizations to say, let's spend time with your leadership. Let's work on your bylaws and the way that you function as an organization. Let's also spend time with your staff. Are they prepared to recruit girls and coach girls? And do they know the differences between coaching girls and coaching boys? So it's really these sort of fundamental things that create that change that when Adidas moves away from breaking barriers, it's not going to completely just upset the apple cart, right? And these organizations are suddenly going to fail or they're suddenly going to revert back to where they were, but rather they'll have those systems that are now in place to help them change and help them continue their good work. That's a really core thing of everything that we do. And then sort of beyond that, you alluded to it, but it's Gen Z, it's millennials, it's now even older generations, Gen X as well, that do really look for what does the brand stand for? What is it doing outside of this? And to making sure that we're matching that message with the rest of the message that we need to put forward. The sports message, the product message, the innovation message, whatever it is, and to tell it in a way that doesn't feel like we're browbeating people, that we're just over the top lecturing them on why they need to use this or do this or think this way, but rather make it so it's a seamless integration so that when someone goes to decide on which shoes to buy, they understand what Adidas or Nike or Asics or Puma or whomever is doing in addition to sort of the technological aspects of what you're putting on your feet.
Definitely. So you mentioned that you have worked with Adidas and Nike, both of them. I mean, similar, they're competitors, they're in a similar industry, different maybe brand approaches to some extent. So in your work, how does it differ when you're working with Adidas and then with Nike that they are similar but yet so different?
I think it's about understanding how those companies operate and what the culture is at their core. At the risk of simplifying, I'm an American living in Germany for the past 7 years. The risk of simplifying, Nike is a very American brand and Adidas is a very German brand. And there are then sort of the ways that these then come to life and the way that what they're willing to talk about publicly, what they aren't, their risk profiles, like all of these things. So it's very much understanding that. It's actually sort of an interesting piece of almost all the work that we do now. And we're seeing purpose in sport play even a bigger role internally or almost matching how much it does externally, is that sort of internal employee engagement is actually engaging employees and understanding what they want out of this, how they can get involved, whether it's mentorship programs or having a chance to meet these athletes or to work on the ground with these grassroots organizations. And so understanding the cultures of those varying companies, whether it's Nike and Adidas or whether the difference between a Deloitte and an Allianz, for example, but to understand them and understand how confident they are to talk about certain things and then to build something that's within those comfort levels. As I mentioned at the top, it's important for us not to just go out there with a pure impact message. While that is the core of what we want to do, we need to make sure that we're meeting those business objectives for organizations as well, or else they won't feel confident about continuing to do this work in the future.
Of course. Something I've spoken about many times on this podcast is women's sports and just the rapid increase that that's had lately. Do you see a similar trend from a marketing perspective? And also, how are you working in women's sports?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's an incredible amount of investment and growth that's happening in women's sports right now. It's all very sort of warranted and welcomed. I think there are some concerns that I have, not in the fact that women's sports should grow, it absolutely should, but that women's sport should grow in a way that's maybe different than men's sport, and the opportunity for women's sport to grow in a way that still really focuses on the grassroots and still really focuses on some of the systemic barriers that women in sport have to face and girls in sport have to face. And so 2 years ago or so, we acquired and partnered up with an organization called the Women's Sports Alliance. It was founded by this woman named Jordan Gard, who's a former England international and a former professional player. And her goal is to really help empower female athletes across the UK, but also across Europe and the rest of the world, and giving them sort of brand and commercial advice, mentorship, linking them with opportunities, et cetera. And she's also working on the brand and federation side as well to make sure that those brands and federations know how to utilize women athletes. So when a brand wants to go and sponsor 3 or 4 or 5 women's athletes, okay, well, what do you need to know about that? How do you align that message? How is that message stronger? There's a whole bunch of statistics out there that show that the followers of women's sports and women's athletes, sort of have a higher likelihood of remembering the product, have a higher likelihood of buying the product, feel like it's a more authentic connection than when a male footballer, for example, sponsors or sort of is sponsored by the same product. And so I think there's a lot of things that we can sort of take this moment to sort of, well, we see this incredible growth. Okay, well, how do we infuse the structure that's needed as it grows to make sure that we are putting in the system in place so that the bottom kind of doesn't fall out in some way? So super exciting. And the work that Jordan and the team at WSA are doing is fantastic, but definitely some things that we need to, I think, be careful about so that we don't have some kind of reckoning in a few years, right?
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. And I've spoken a lot about women's soccer on this podcast. And I think that the unanimous thought now is that you shouldn't just do a copy paste of whatever men's football has been doing or soccer.
Right.
It needs to be created like for the women, not just make a copy paste. And that is the key to success. And I think that applies for other sports as well, obviously.
Yeah, and total alignment with that. I think there's just an opportunity to build something that's, hesitant to say stronger, to build something that's really sound and that sets the women's game up for success moving forward.
Definitely. If we are looking ahead, future of sports and purpose, what are some trends or key factors that you see is important for purpose-led partnerships in sports in the next few years?
I think the first place to start would be on the subject of athletes. We've seen alongside brands, athletes and influencers more generally are quite trusted by the public. And I think there's an opportunity for brands and for leagues and teams to leverage athletes in a way that's more inclusive of them and sets them up for future success and continued success, but is also then very beneficial to what the brand is trying to do. We've also seen a ton of evidence that athletes, especially when there's a purpose element, are way more engaged, are way more sort of authentic, are willing to go above and beyond. So I think there's an opportunity for athletes to play an even bigger role moving forward. And you're seeing a lot of athletes take multiple different sort of types of partnership contracts and things like this, whether that's cash, whether that's equity, whether that's ownership. There's a whole lot of opportunities for athletes there and for brands to work with athletes and to really sort of help elevate what you're doing on a brand level. That would be probably number one. Number two for me would be, and sort of just going back to the World Economic Forum topic as well, I just feel that there is this opportunity, and it's this just massive, massive opportunity for brands and federations to step up and to fill this gap and to, as I mentioned before, to sort of solidify this foundation of sport. I think there's an opportunity here to close some of that gap to get people more active. That's making them more active, not just putting down their phone and getting off the computer or out in front of the TV screen, but that's also making sport more accessible and giving them the equipment that they need and making it a safe space for them to practice sport and on the environment. And I think if a brand and federations are able to step into that space and really do meaningful work, I think that they will have sort of a lasting legacy throughout sport that probably rivals a lot of what we've seen now. I mean, I think if you think about the sort of legacy brands in sport, you think about like Olympics and Coca-Cola or Olympics and Toyota and these brands that just seem to have kind of been around for forever within the federation. Can some of these other brands step up and really create something within to fill this gap? I think this is a really obvious place for someone to go. I think that you have to have a little bit of the guts, I guess, to sort of stick with it. It's not going to be something that you can just market during a season and you market at one time with some paid behind it, and then you're going to see immediate results behind it. It takes a long-term commitment. It takes multiple years. It takes real resources. But I think the payoff is going to be huge. I would say those two things are probably the sort of the most exciting. I mean, we touched as well on women's sport, which I think is just still has the stratosphere yet to hit. But yeah, I'm curious for you, is there anything else that you really think of when you think of sport in 2026?
I agree with everything that you said. I feel like AI is on everyone's mind these days. So I'm very curious to see how that's going to be integrated in sports, because you still want the human-centered center. But definitely AI can be beneficial in many ways. And maybe it has to do with more automated cameras in capturing the games and in some type of edits. And I know they use it a lot for scouting purposes. So I'm curious about that. And also from your aspect, from a marketing perspective, do you see AI as a good tool or something that might be good or bad, or both?
Yeah, it's probably both to some extent. I think generally technology is a tool, right? And it's sort of neutral inherently, but how it's deployed and how it's utilized decides whether it's sort of good or bad. I agree with you. You're absolutely right on AI. I think I've been a little bit down on the short-term impact of AI in sport, mainly because I haven't seen so many applications that I feel like make the viewing experience or make the experience of sport better. I think there's some really cool applications. I mean, what Steve Ballmer has done with the LA Clippers Stadium and I think it's called the Intuit Dome, what they've sort of done around that is really interesting and it's super fascinating. But yeah, I would be curious about how it's deployed in the sort of mid to long term to make things better. There is some really interesting technology out there around talking to former legends, uploading their sort of interviews, and then you can talk to an AI version of them and things like that. And lots of morality questions to sort out, but maybe above my pay grade for the moment.
Yeah. Otherwise, for 2026, we have the World Cup for men's soccer, and soccer in the US is a big thing. It's increasing passing. I work in ice hockey on a daily basis. I think that soccer has passed ice hockey now as one of the major sports in the US. And then obviously the Olympics coming up as well. So a lot of mega events and a lot of sponsorship opportunities. And it's interesting to see the legacy after the games, because it's going to be a hype with soccer in the US for sure after the World Cup. But can they keep that momentum going? And same with Italy, can they keep up some of the momentum after sports participation and these type of things? So I think, yeah, that's obviously going to be another big thing for 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm curious about you and your career. So how did you get into the sports industry, and how has your career journey been like up until this point?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a winding road into sport. To be honest, I played sport my whole life and was always passionate about it, but I actually never sort of directly sought out to be in it. I actually started my career at an impact communications agency in Los Angeles called Enzo. And for me, the communication space was super interesting. The creative agency space was super interesting. I started out actually as like a brand strategist. So I was doing a lot of research and a lot of insights and why does this audience care about this topic and things like this. And I was fortunate enough to sort of start my career in purpose and managed to stay there ever since. I wasn't working at all in sport. I was working with like brands like Google or Airbnb, the Nature Conservancy, the city of Los Angeles, et cetera. So I kind of cut my teeth there. I had two really great mentors, Carrie Strandman and Sebastian Buck, who were fantastic for me and helped sort of shape me and push me forward. And from there actually is when I then got into sport. There was an organization called Common Goal that was just getting started. So Common Goal, for those who don't know, is an organization focused around getting players and teams and federations to donate 1% of their salary or their revenue to go towards grassroots sports, and specifically organizations that are using sport within communities to solve problems. So I actually helped lead the communications department there as they were launching and getting started, and worked with some amazing players, Juan Mata, for example, Alex Morgan, Megan Rapinoe, Giorgio Cellini, some pretty incredible names. Yeah, and then after I left there, I was sort of just freelancing, consulting, doing some communications work, always still sticking in sport. I think once you kind of get into sport, you stick in it unless you force yourself out. And then about 6 years ago, Neil Duffy, who's the other co-founder of 17 Sport, reached out and they were just starting the agency. So I was actually employee number one, which was quite exciting and has been quite exciting to be part of the company as it's grown and we've sort of established ourselves. And yeah, I've ended up here. I mean, to be honest with you, like I said, sport was not necessarily on my radar. And actually, when I was in university, I had the typical US experience, which was every class I took, I decided that's what I wanted my major to be. So I think I switched my major like 9 or 10 times. At one point, I wanted to be James Bond and work for the government. And the other times I was wanting to be an ancient Greece professor and all over the place. So I've always just been super interested in what makes people decide to do things or tick or emotional or what drives people. And I found sort of the sports marketing space and specifically the purpose-led sports marketing space is like a good way to invoke that feeling in people and try to hit that same spot.
Interesting. Maybe it's not too late to be James Bond either.
Maybe not.
So you mentioned you're a US citizen living in Germany. So how was that move? It's a long distance and I guess also a big cultural difference as well.
Yeah, it was a big difference. I had sort of known graduating college, I always wanted to go abroad, and I was sort of trying to figure out what that looked like for me. I was at one point, I was talking to a creative agency, like completely different direction, but I was talking to a creative agency in Hong Kong and everything. And then the Common Goal job, which was based here in Berlin, was just sort of a chance opportunity. I had done a little bit of work for them sort of on the side. I had gotten connected with their founders, and so they asked me to take the job, and I think it was the end of January, and by mid-February I was in Berlin. And so I went from surfing in Los Angeles one day to it was snowing, and I landed on February 14th. I have a very specific memory of landing in Berlin and it snowing and questioning myself about what the hell I had just done. So it was a little bit of a shock for sure. The joke amongst my friends is that I have a very love-hate relationship with Berlin. It's a beautiful city. It's an amazing city. I've also threatened to leave it every year. My partner lives here and we now have a little son, a little 6-month-old. I'm here for the foreseeable future.
I understand. Yeah, I've been moving around a little bit as well. You mentioned that you want to be an ancient Greece professor, something like that before. So I lived in Athens, Greece for a couple of years. So, but now back in Sweden again. And but it's nice to see other cultures and get different experiences that you can take that with you in your life and in your work as well.
Absolutely.
Do you see the marketing aspect and work, does that differ a lot from US versus Europe in the approach?
Yeah, I think it does. There's a couple just sort of like structural differences. I think budgets typically are much higher in the United States than they are in Europe. I also think the risk profiles, like what brands are willing to talk about and things like that definitely changes. I think it's a lot of that. I think there's also a lot of spectacle in the US, a lot of like going to a game, going to a sporting event. It should be like, it's a full entertainment. There's screens and there's many different restaurants providing food there, and there's fan activations, and there's like this whole ecosystem around the game that's happening, merchandise, everything. When you go to a sporting event in Europe, for the most part, obviously outside of things like the Olympics, it's much more like there's the stadium, there's the game. It feels a little bit more pure in a funny way. But yeah, there's definitely some differences. And actually, as at 17 Sport, we've primarily been working in Europe for the last like sort of 3 or 4, or the first 3 or 4 years of the company. In the last couple of years, we've been building out an office and doing more work in the US. And even though I'm an American and we have a few other Americans on the team, there has been some sort of learnings there around how we position things, how we talk about things, the scale of stuff. It's a pretty interesting difference, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, the sport experience, as you mentioned, is different. When I went to my first, call it American football game, I was surprised that people, like during the game, you could go out, get a beer, come back, go get a hot dog. Like in Europe, it's more, as you said, like when you're watching the game, you're watching the game. And then, okay, in intermission, you go out and do what you have to. But otherwise, it's focused on the game, while it's more of maybe a spectacle and a show, as you said, in the US. And that also affects the marketing aspect with sponsorships, right? You have much more opportunities in American sport because there are short breaks here and there that you can put in an ad. While take a soccer game, that's 45 minutes uninterrupted. Okay, you can have something running on the boards around, but otherwise it's 45 minutes uninterrupted before the first intermission.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the sort of the breadth of available space is just huge. I mean, as you mentioned, both on TV, on digital, but also just literally in person as well. And you're seeing more and more brands activate around games, not even next to the game, might be a couple blocks over, and they're doing a takeover, and they're not even an official sponsor of the team, but they're sort of seizing on that momentum in that moment. So there's definitely a lot more space. I'm interested with some of the other stuff that's coming, like the NBA Europe rumblings and what's happening there and all of that. Like, what will change about sport in Europe? Will there be a sort of Americanification of it to some extent if some of these bigger brands like NBA are having a more regular presence? The NBA Berlin game was here just a couple weeks ago. And that alone was there was fan zones and spectacles, and every bar was showing stuff, and it was sponsored by local brands. And it felt very American to me. So it will be interesting to see how that continues to evolve moving forward.
Yeah, I had a while back an episode about that with the NBA potentially coming into Europe. So very interesting for sure.
Mm.
Anything that I haven't asked you that you want to bring up, either your own journey or with your work?
No, I appreciate the conversation. It's been a really nice one.
Same, likewise. I like to end on a networking question. Who from your network do you think would be a good guest on this show?
But that's a good question. I probably have about 10 names for you. I'll give you two, if that's okay. One would be Jordan Gard, who I mentioned before, the founder and MD of Women's Sports Alliance. I think she has some incredible insights on women's sport, especially women's football. She just has really incredible perspective. I think the work that she's doing with the team there is awesome. And the other person I would actually recommend is also somebody else I mentioned, Sebastian Buck, who's the founder of Enzo. He's not directly involved in sport. I suspect he will be more and more in the future because he just is so passionate about it. But I think he has a really interesting sort of view of the world and about the role that sport can play and all of that. So would highly recommend both of those for sure.
Thank you. That's two great names. Andrew, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining Sports Management Podcast.
Yeah, thanks a bunch, Marcus. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the follow or subscribe button on your podcast app so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com, connect with me on LinkedIn, or follow the podcast on Instagram, X, and Facebook @SportsMPodcast.